All right, now why would we really use components? Sure, it cleans up the HTML and it saves us potentially a little time if we're creating a lot of these, but its use case seems pretty limited based on what we've learned so far. But that's not entirely true. I want you to think of a component as a template. I mean, that is, in fact, why we utilize this template property. But I want you to think of a component as a template for more information, a template for a particular type of information, for example. So let's say we were making a page that allows an individual, like a manager, to monitor a team in some way. Okay, so maybe this is a page for a teacher to monitor all of his or her students. Okay, so first I'll set up some data. Well, no, I will not set up some data. First, let's just create a component, and let's call it. Comment this out, and let's call this component app-student. It's always good to give your component name some kind of prefix like app or my or something like that, just to make sure, absolutely sure, that you're not overwriting any actual HTML elements. All right, so we'll call it app-student, and inside app-student there will be a div, and there will be an h1 that says student's name. So, like, let's use Evan for now. And there will be let's have a paragraph that says the student's progress, 76%, something along those lines. And then below this, let's have a button. Like, we need to flag this student for some reason. We need to set an appointment with this student, or we need to send a message to this student, or we need to more closely monitor this student because they're having problems. Right? An H1, a paragraph, and a button, all in this app student component. And now in our HTML, let's create a couple of those. App student. Okay, there we go. We've got 3 students. 3 student names. Let's change this to an H3. Three student components. Now nothing happens. They're not capable of any kind of functionality yet, and they all have the same information, which is a problem. But with these components, what we can do is swap out this static information for more dynamic information. In the same way that we might use two-way data binding from a data point in the master view instance. So first, let's try it this way. I'm going to give my component here its own data object. The one thing to know about the data object in a component is, unlike this data object, it can't simply be an object literal like this. It actually has to be structured as a function which returns an object literal. Otherwise, however, it will function exactly like the data in our master view instance. So inside this data object, let's add a name property and a progress property. And now let's swap out the static info here for dynamic info, like this. Let's add a role as well. I'm gonna add role. And up here, we'll add role of student. Okay, so we're now using two-way data binding inside our template, inside our component, which is being rendered 3 times in our HTML. We're basically creating another view instance, but inside this specific component. If I reload my page, it still works. It still prints Evan, student, and 76%. And if I change the name up here, it changes the name in each of those components. So far, so good. That's great, but it isn't terribly helpful for creating or using this app student component for every actual student in our class. So for the time being, I'm going to get rid of this data property, and instead of storing these values inside the data property of this component, we're instead going to pass this component information when it is created. We're going to pass this component information when it is created here in the HTML. So I'm going to pass this component the following props or properties. If you're familiar with React, this is a concept that comes directly from React and should be very familiar to you. If you're not, then this is a concept you will run into very early on in React. Props are going to be properties which are passed to this component, and props should contain an array of strings. And what we want, the properties which we want to pass in are name, role, and progress. Okay? Name, role, and progress. What props will actually do is tell this component to expect to receive each of these values from the HTML when it is rendered. And what it will do is create properties called name, called role, and called progress in the data object, the implicit data object of this component. All right, so we've given it props, we've told it what to expect. Now we need to actually relay that information to the component when it's created. So I'm going to come down here. For the first one, I'm going to say name equals Evan, and role equals mentor, and progress equals, let's go an A, not applicable, because I am a mentor. And then for the second one, let's say name is Sam, role is student, progress is 76%. And then for the third one, name is Courtney, role is student, progress is 89%. Let's save, reload. And we now have 3 very different components, all using the same code template. Evan, Sam, Courtney. Mentor, student, student, not applicable, 76%, 89%.